buried me alive for being fat. Mountain Man dug me up and gave me a reason to live. The Wyoming
choices we
Territory
make
in
today will determine the
1789
fate of this
was no
community for
place for the
generations
weak,
to come.
and certainly
We
no
cannot
place for
afford
those
to
deemed
falter now.
different. Evelyn Hart learned this truth the hard way through every whispered insult, every disgusted glare, every empty promise of work that never materialized. At 19 years old, she had learned to make herself small, an impossible task for a woman whose body refused to conform to the frontier's brutal standards of worth. The town of Redemption Creek sat like a scar on the landscape, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to life in the shadow of the Medicine Bow Mountains. It was a town built on harsh soil and harsher hearts, where superstition ran as deep as the copper veins in the surrounding hills. And in the summer of 1789, when the rains refused to come and the creek ran dry, the good people of Redemption Creek needed someone to blame. Evelyn had arrived 2 years earlier with a traveling merchant caravan, orphaned and desperate. Her parents had died of fever on the trail, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a body that drew contempt rather than sympathy. She found work where she could, scrubbing floors, hauling water, mending clothes, but the wages were always less than promised, the work always harder than agreed. She lived in a lean-to behind the general store, surviving on scraps and the occasional act of reluctant charity that always came with a lecture about gluttony. The drought began in April, turning the grasslands brown and the townspeople mean. By June, the wells were running low. By July, the first cases of fever appeared, a mysterious illness that left its victims burning with heat and covered in red welts. The town's self-appointed preacher, Josiah Blackwood, saw divine punishment where others saw bad luck. And when he looked for the source of God's wrath, his eyes settled on Evelyn. "She is the mark of our sin," Blackwood thundered from his makeshift pulpit one Sunday morning, his finger pointed directly at Evelyn, where she stood at the back of the congregation. "Look at her, gorged on excess while the righteous starve. She is the appetite that has called down judgment upon us." It didn't matter that Evelyn ate less than anyone in town, surviving on moldy bread and potato peelings. It didn't matter that she had offered to help dig new wells, to tend the sick, to do whatever was needed. The narrative had been written, and she was cast as the villain in their story of suffering. The frightened and the faithful are often the cruelest, and Redemption Creek was full of both. The vote came 3 days later. Mayor Cyrus Pemberton, a fat man himself, but one whose girth was associated with prosperity rather than sin, called for a town meeting. The decision was nearly unanimous. Evelyn Hart would be sacrificed to appease whatever force had brought misfortune to their town. Not killed outright, of course. That would be murder. Instead, they would follow the old ways, the dark customs whispered about in folk tales. They would bury her alive, returning her to the earth she had supposedly stolen from. Evelyn fought when they came for her. She scratched and kicked and begged, but there were too many hands, too many voices calling her demon and curse and worse. They dragged her to the edge of the woods as the sun began to set, to a pit they had dug that morning with almost ceremonial care. It was deep enough to prevent escape, wide enough to fit her body, with only inches to spare. "Please," Evelyn sobbed as they forced her down into the hole. "Please, I've done nothing wrong. I've only tried to help. Please." Preacher Blackwood stood at the edge of the pit. his Bible clutched in his hands like a weapon. "Your sin is your existence," he intoned. "Your gluttony is written upon your flesh. May the earth take back what you have stolen, and may God have mercy on your soul." They stuffed a rag in her mouth to silence her screams. Then the dirt came, shovelful after shovelful, heavy and suffocating. Evelyn struggled, her hands clawing upward, her lungs burning for air. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the impassive faces of her murderers, watching her burial with the satisfied expressions of people who believed they were doing righteous work. The dirt pressed down on her chest, filling her nose and eyes. Each breath became a battle, each movement more futile than the last. Her mind fragmented into disconnected thoughts. Her mother's face, the smell of bread baking, a childhood song she had forgotten she remembered. And then, as consciousness began to slip away, a single clear thought. I don't want to die, not like this, not for nothing. Jacob Boone had been called many things in his 53 years. Soldier, husband, father, killer, coward, ghost. These days, he preferred the last one. Ghosts didn't have to explain themselves, didn't have to carry the weight of conversation, didn't have to pretend that the world made sense or that God had a plan. Ghosts simply existed, somewhere between the living and the dead, belonging to neither. His cabin sat at the tree line, 2 miles up a hunting trail that most folks in Redemption Creek had forgotten existed. He'd built it 24 years ago, when he was young and foolish enough to believe that distance from civilization could equal peace. He and his wife Sarah had meant to start a new life here, away from the wars and the violence that had defined his years as a cavalry scout. They would raise their children in the clean mountain air, grow old watching the seasons turn, and die in the same bed they'd shared for decades. It had lasted 3 years. The fire that took Sarah and their infant son Thomas had started in the kitchen, or so Jacob had determined afterward. He'd been hunting, had stayed out longer than planned tracking an elk. When he returned, the cabin was an inferno. He could still hear Sarah's screams when the wind blew a certain way through the pines, could still smell the smoke, feel the heat that had blistered his hands as he tried and failed to break through the door. The trapper who found him 3 days later said he'd been sitting in the ashes, burned and half mad, holding a charred piece of what might have been a child's blanket. Jacob had rebuilt the cabin alone, using the same logs he'd cut with Sarah, sleeping outside until it was finished because he couldn't bear to be enclosed in the dark. Then he'd stayed. 21 years of staying, of hunting and trapping and trading his furs in town twice a year, barely speaking, barely living. The people of Redemption Creek called him the Mountain Ghost, crossing themselves when they saw him, telling their children he'd eaten his family to survive a hard winter. Let them talk. Their stories were no worse than his memories. He was checking his trap lines on the evening of July 23rd when the rain finally came. It arrived suddenly, violently, the kind of storm that seemed to crack the sky open. Jacob took shelter under an outcropping, watching the lightning illuminate the valley below. When the storm passed, he continued his circuit, moving through the dripping forest with the silent efficiency of long practice. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not an animal caught in a trap, though he'd heard plenty of those. Something else, something human, a desperate, muffled gasping that seemed to come from the ground itself. Jacob froze, listening. There, again. closer to the road than his trapline, near the edge where the trees thinned out. He approached carefully, his rifle ready, his mind sorting through possibilities. Injured traveler, wounded animal, or something worse. Bandits used injured women as bait sometimes, ambushing good Samaritans. But there was no ambush, just a patch of disturbed earth already turning to mud in the rain, and that terrible sound of someone fighting for air. Jacob didn't think. He dropped his rifle and started digging with his bare hands, clawing through the wet dirt like a man possessed. His fingers found fabric first, then skin, an arm, waving weakly, desperately grasping at nothing. He dug faster, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. A shoulder emerged, then a head, streaked with mud and barely conscious. A woman, young. Her lips were blue, her eyes rolling back. The rag they'd stuffed in her mouth came away in his hand, and she sucked in air in great rattling gasps. "Easy," Jacob heard himself say, his voice rusty with disuse. "Easy now. I've got you." He pulled her from the grave, because that's what it was, he realized with growing horror. Someone had buried this woman alive, had meant for her to die here, alone and suffocating, while they went about their lives. The rage that rose in Jacob was old and familiar, the same fury that had driven him to do terrible things in his younger days, the same anger he'd spent 20 years trying to bury in these mountains. The woman coughed violently, expelling mud and water. Her body convulsed, and Jacob turned her on her side, supporting her weight as she vomited dark liquid. She was heavy in his arms, solid and real and alive against all odds. When the coughing finally subsided, she looked at him with eyes that held no hope, only confusion. "Am I dead?" she whispered. "No," Jacob said, "but someone sure tried to make you that way." She started to cry then, deep sobs that shook her entire frame. Jacob held her, this stranger he'd pulled from the earth, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Some frozen thing that had been locked away since Sarah died. He didn't know this woman's name or her story, didn't know who had done this or why, but he knew with absolute certainty that he would not let her go back to whatever hell she'd come from. "Can you walk?" he asked. She shook her head, and Jacob saw that her legs were twisted at odd angles, damaged from the cramped space and the weight of the dirt. Without another word, he gathered her into his arms and stood. She was heavy, yes, but Jacob had carried heavier burdens. He'd carried Sarah's coffin. He'd carried his guilt for 21 years. This weight was different. This weight was something he could actually help. "My cabin's 2 miles up the mountain," he said. "You'll be safe there, I promise you that." The woman said nothing, just pressed her face against his chest and cried as Jacob carried her through the rain-soaked forest, away from her grave, toward something that might, with time and care, become a life worth living. Evelyn woke to warmth and the smell of wood smoke. For a confused moment, she thought she was dead. This must be what heaven felt like, soft and safe and free from pain. Then her body reminded her that she was very much alive, sending up reports of every injury, bruised ribs, wrenched shoulders, legs that screamed when she tried to move them. "Don't," a rough voice said from somewhere to her left. "Don't try to move yet. You're banged up pretty bad." Evelyn's eyes focused slowly. She was in a cabin, small but well-maintained, lying on a bed that was too soft to be real. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. Herbs hung from the rafters, and sitting in a chair nearby was the man from the forest, the one who'd pulled her from the ground. In the firelight, she could see him properly now, tall and powerfully built despite his age, with long gray hair tied back and a beard that reached his chest. His eyes were the color of winter ice, but the expression in them wasn't cold, just careful, watchful. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked. Her voice came out as a croak, her throat raw from screaming and dirt. "Name's Jacob Boone. This is my place." He gestured to a cup on the table beside her. "Water. Drink slow." Evelyn tried to sit up, gasped at the pain, and fell back. Jacob stood quickly, moving to help her, but she flinched away from his touch. He froze, hands raised, and something in his expression told her he understood what it meant to be afraid of help, to distrust kindness because it always came with a price. "I won't hurt you," he said simply, "but you need water, and you need to drink. So I'm going to help you sit up. That all right?" After a moment, Evelyn nodded. Jacob's hands were gentle but firm as he positioned pillows behind her back and handed her the cup. The water was cool and clean, the best thing she'd ever tasted. She drank greedily, coughed, and Jacob took the cup away. "Slow," he repeated. "You haven't had proper water in a while. Your body needs to remember how it works." "How long?" Evelyn asked. "Found you last night. It's afternoon now. You've been in and out, mostly out. That's good. Your body needed the rest." Evelyn looked down at herself. Someone had cleaned her, dressed her in a shirt that was clearly Jacob's, wrapped her legs in bandages. The realization of her vulnerability hit her like a fist. She was alone, in the mountains, with a strange man who could do anything he wanted to her and no one would ever know. Jacob seemed to read her thoughts. "Your clothes are drying by the fire," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I cleaned you up best I could without crossing lines. You were covered in mud and blood, and I couldn't tend your injuries otherwise. But I swear to you, on my wife's grave, I took no liberties, and I won't." There was something in the way he said wife that made Evelyn look at him more closely, past tense, and the rawness in his voice suggested the wound was still fresh, even though everything else about this cabin spoke of years lived alone. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly, for everything, for digging me up, for bringing me here." "Don't thank me yet," Jacob said, settling back in his chair. "I need to know what happened, who buried you and why. Because if they think you're dead, that's one thing. But if they find out you survived—" And there it was, the question Evelyn had been dreading. Because how could she explain the insanity of it? How could she make this stranger understand that an entire town had decided she deserved to die simply for existing in a body they found offensive? "They said I was cursed," Evelyn said finally. "The town, Redemption Creek, down in the valley, there's been a drought and sickness, people dying, and the preacher, he said it was because of me, because I'm—" She couldn't say it, couldn't force the word past her lips, but Jacob understood. "Because you're fat," he said matter-of-factly. No judgment, no disgust. Just stating a fact, the way he might comment on the weather. "And they blamed you for their troubles, decided you were eating more than your share, bringing down God's wrath. So they buried you alive to appease whatever they're afraid of." Evelyn stared at him, stunned by his directness. "You think it's stupid?" "I think people are stupid," Jacob corrected, "especially when they're scared. Fear makes folks cruel, makes them look for easy answers, simple solutions. Easier to bury one girl than to dig a new well or admit that sometimes bad things just happen. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. I didn't eat more than anyone. I worked hard. I tried to be good, and they still. I know, Jacob said. I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry that people are the way they are. Sorry I didn't find you sooner. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Evelyn asked the question that had been building since she woke up. What happens now? What do I do? Jacob was quiet for so long that Evelyn thought he might not answer. Then, you heal, he said. You get your strength back, and then you decide you can go back down to that town if you want. I'll go with you. Make sure they face justice. Or you can go somewhere else. Start over, and I'll help you get there. But right now, you rest. Whatever comes next, we'll figure it out. Together. The word together did something strange to Evelyn's heart. She'd been alone for so long, had learned to expect nothing from people but cruelty or indifference. But this man, this ghost in the mountains, was offering her something she'd never had, a choice and time to make it. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Jacob nodded and stood. I'll make some food. Nothing heavy. Your stomach needs to start slow, too. We'll take it one day at a time. As he moved to the hearth to prepare a meal, Evelyn closed her eyes and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a fragile, tentative flutter of hope. The days that followed fell into a careful rhythm. Jacob would wake before dawn to check his traps and tend to his business, always making sure Evelyn had water and food before he left. She would sleep fitfully, waking to pain and nightmares, then forcing herself to stay conscious through the daylight hours. Jacob would return by afternoon, bringing fresh meat or herbs, and they would eat together in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable. It took a week before Evelyn could stand without Jacob's help, her legs still weak and unsteady. It took 2 weeks before she could make it from the bed to the chair by the fire without collapsing. Jacob was patient, offering assistance only when asked, giving her space to struggle and fail and try again. He seemed to understand without her having to explain that she needed to prove to herself that she could survive. You're healing well, Jacob observed one evening as Evelyn managed to walk a full circuit of the cabin. Faster than I expected. I'm strong, Evelyn said, then immediately regretted it. People always took that as an invitation to comment on her body, to make jokes or observations about how someone so heavy could claim strength. But Jacob just nodded. I can see that. Takes real strength to survive what you went through, body and mind both. It was such a simple statement, such a radical act of acceptance, that Evelyn had to turn away to hide her tears. In 3 weeks, with this strange mountain man, she'd been treated with more respect than in 19 years everywhere else. As her body healed, Evelyn began to notice things about Jacob, the way his hand shook sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, the nightmares that woke him in the night, leaving him sitting by the fire until dawn, the fact that he never ever started a fire without checking it 3 times, making absolutely certain every ember was contained, and most tellingly, the small grave marker behind the cabin carved with 2 names, Sarah Boone and Thomas Boone, and a date from 21 years ago. Your wife and son, Evelyn said one afternoon when she finally worked up the courage. I'm sorry, I should have said that before. Jacob was carving a new handle for an axe, his movements precise and practiced. He didn't look up, but his hand stilled. "Thank you. It was a long time ago." "Does it get easier?" "No," Jacob said simply, "but you get stronger. Learn to carry it. Learn to live with the weight." "How did they die?" Evelyn asked, then immediately added, "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "Fire," Jacob said. "I was out hunting. Stayed too long. When I came back, the cabin was burning. I couldn't get to them in time, couldn't save them." The pain in his voice was so raw, so present, that Evelyn understood. 21 years might have passed, but for Jacob, his family had died yesterday, and would die again tomorrow, and every day after that. "That's why you live alone," Evelyn said softly. "Why you stayed up here." "Didn't seem right to be around people," Jacob admitted. "Not when I'd failed the ones I was supposed to protect. Figured the mountain was a good place for someone like me. No one to hurt. No one to let down." Evelyn thought about this for a long moment. Then she said something she'd never dared say out loud before. "The town blamed me for the drought, for the sickness, said I was a curse, and part of me believed them. Thought maybe I was wrong for existing, maybe they were right to bury me." Jacob looked up then, his ice-blue eyes sharp. "And now?" "Now I think they were just scared," Evelyn said, "and cruel and wrong, but it still hurts. Still makes me wonder if I'll ever find a place where I can just be, without apology, without having to make myself smaller." "You're not small," Jacob said. "Not, you shouldn't make yourself small, or you're beautiful the way you are, or any of the platitudes she'd heard before. Just a statement of fact. You're not small." "No," Evelyn agreed, feeling something unlock in her chest. "I'm not." "Good," Jacob said, returning to his carving. "This world tries to make us all smaller, tries to fit us into boxes, tell us what we should be. But some of us are meant to take up space, meant to be big, in body or spirit or both. Nothing wrong with that." It was the longest speech she'd heard him make, and every word felt like absolution, like permission to exist exactly as she was. Evelyn wiped her eyes and picked up a second knife, gesturing to the piece of wood in Jacob's hands. "Teach me?" she asked. Jacob smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." They fell into a new routine after that. Jacob taught Evelyn to carve, to trap, to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of birds. Evelyn taught Jacob to laugh again, to enjoy the small pleasures of companionship, to remember that life could be more than just survival. They shared stories, hers of growing up on wagon trains and in orphanages, his of cavalry raids and frontier battles. They discovered shared loves, books, which Jacob had a surprising collection of, music, though neither could carry a tune, and the sharp, clean beauty of mountain mornings. And slowly, carefully, something shifted between them. It started with accidental touches, hands brushing as they prepared food, shoulders touching as they sat by the fire, then deliberate ones, Jacob's hand on Evelyn's back as he guided her through a difficult carving technique, Evelyn's fingers on Jacob's wrist as she examined a cut he'd gotten from a trap. Neither acknowledged it, but both felt it, the way the air changed when they were close, the way silence became charged with meaning. It was Evelyn who spoke first, late one night when neither could sleep. They were sitting on the porch, watching shooting stars wrapped in blankets against the cold. "Jacob," she said quietly, "why did you save me?" "Really?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because when I saw that dirt moving, heard you fighting to breathe, It was like the universe was giving me a second chance. I couldn't save Sarah, couldn't save Thomas, but I could save you. And if I didn't, then what was the point of any of it? What was the point of surviving if I couldn't help someone else do the same? Evelyn turned to look at him, this man who'd become her entire world in the space of 2 months. "I'm glad you found me," she said. "Not just because you saved my life, but because I think maybe I saved yours too." Jacob met her eyes and something passed between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement of the bond they'd formed. "Yeah," he said softly, "I think maybe you did." He reached for her hand, and Evelyn took it, marveling at how right it felt, how safe. They sat like that until dawn, fingers intertwined, neither wanting to break the spell. But spells are made to be broken, and 3 days later, the devil came calling. Evelyn was alone when they arrived. Jacob had gone down the mountain to trade furs and gather supplies, promising to return by evening. She was practicing her knife work when she heard the horses, multiple riders coming up the trail. Her first instinct was to hide, but something made her stand her ground. She'd spent too long running, hiding, making herself invisible. If trouble was coming, she'd face it standing up. There were 5 of them, led by Preacher Josiah Blackwood himself. His eyes widened when he saw her, shock and horror warring on his face. "You," he breathed. "Impossible. You should be—" "Dead," Evelyn finished, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I was, or close enough. Someone dug me up, gave me a second chance at life, and now I'm wondering, did you all come to finish the job?" "You're an abomination," Blackwood spat. "A demon who crawled from hell itself. The fact that you still draw breath proves your unholy nature." The men with him shifted uncomfortably, hands moving to weapons. Evelyn's mind raced. She was outnumbered, still recovering, and Jacob was hours away. But she'd learned something in her time on this mountain. She was done being a victim. "I'm not a demon," Evelyn said clearly. "I'm just a woman you tried to murder because you needed someone to blame for your problems. Has the rain come yet? Has the sickness stopped? Or did burying me do nothing except let you sleep at night, convinced you'd done something righteous?" One of the men, she recognized him as Thomas Wheeler, who owned the dry goods store, had the grace to look ashamed, but Blackwood's face only darkened. "You speak blasphemy," he hissed. "You corrupt the very air with your presence. We should have bound you properly, should have—" "Should have what?" A new voice cut in, cold and deadly. "Made sure she died slower?" Jacob emerged from the tree line, his rifle trained on Blackwood. He must have seen the riders and circled around, and Evelyn had never been so glad to see anyone in her life. "Who are you?" Blackwood demanded, trying to muster his authority. "I'm the man who dug her up," Jacob said. "Found her half dead, buried like trash. Took me a while to figure out which town had done it. I was coming to pay you all a visit soon." He moved closer, never lowering the rifle. "But it seems you saved me the trouble." "This is none of your concern," Blackwood blustered. "She is a curse upon—" "She is a human being," Jacob interrupted, his voice like gravel. "And you tried to kill her. That makes it murder, preacher, and around here we hang murderers." "You wouldn't dare," one of the other men said. "There are 5 of us and only—" The rifle cracked, and the man's hat flew off his head. Everyone froze. 4 more bullets, Jacob said calmly, "and I don't miss twice. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn those horses around and ride back to your town, and you're going to tell everyone that if I ever, ever see any of you near this mountain again, I'll kill you. No warning, no mercy. You had your chance at mercy, and you used it to bury an innocent girl alive." "She's not innocent," Blackwood insisted. But he was backing his horse away. "She's fat, she's—" "She's mine," Jacob said, and the word hung in the air like a vow. "She's under my protection, and I've killed better men than you for less reason. Now get, before I change my mind about letting you leave." They went, fleeing down the mountain in a clatter of hooves and muttered curses. Jacob kept the rifle raised until they were out of sight, then finally lowered it, his hand shaking. "Are you all right?" he asked Evelyn. She nodded, then shook her head, then started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that turned into sobs. Jacob set down the rifle and pulled her into his arms, and Evelyn clung to him like a drowning woman to driftwood. "I was so scared," she admitted. "Me too," Jacob said. "When I saw them here, saw you facing them alone." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You're so damn brave, standing up to them like that, but you don't have to face them alone anymore. You understand? Not ever again." "You said I was yours," Evelyn said softly. Jacob's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't realized what he'd said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to presume." "Say it again," Evelyn interrupted. "Please." Jacob searched her face, and whatever he saw there made his expression soften. "You're mine," he said quietly, "if you'll have me. An old, broken-down mountain man with more ghosts than future. But I'm yours too, if you want me, for as long as you'll keep me." Evelyn kissed him then, standing on her toes to reach his lips, pouring everything she felt into that kiss, gratitude and hope, and something that felt dangerously like love. Jacob kissed her back with equal fervor, his arms around her waist, holding her like she was precious, like she was worth protecting, like she was enough. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn whispered, "I want you. I want this. Want to stay here with you and build something real." "Then stay," Jacob said. "Stay and help me turn this cabin back into a home. Stay and teach me how to live again, not just survive. Stay and let me prove that you deserve better than what the world gave you." "And let you prove the same," Evelyn added, touching his weathered face. "Because you deserve better too. Deserve to forgive yourself. Deserve to be happy." Jacob pulled her close again, resting his forehead against hers. "Then we'll learn together," he said. "Two broken people making something whole. And in the shadow of the mountain, under the vast Wyoming sky, that's exactly what they did." The months that followed were the happiest of Evelyn's life. She and Jacob worked side by side to winterize the cabin, cutting wood and caulking cracks and laying in supplies. Jacob taught her to hunt, and after several comical failures, she brought down her first deer. They celebrated with a feast, laughing until their sides hurt, and that night Jacob kissed her again, slower and sweeter, like a promise. They shared the bed now, bodies intertwined for warmth and comfort. Jacob treated her with a reverence that made Evelyn's heart ache, tracing the curves of her body like she was a work of art. He told her she was beautiful, and for the first time in her life she believed it. Not because her body had changed, but because she finally saw herself through eyes that weren't blinded by prejudice. Winter came hard and fast, trapping them in the cabin for weeks at a time. They spent the long nights reading to each other from Jacob's books, carving wooden figures and talking about everything and nothing. Jacob told her about Sarah, not to compare, but to share, to give Evelyn the full truth of who he'd been. And Evelyn talked about the parents she'd lost, the towns that had rejected her, the dreams she'd given up on. "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted one snowy evening, "wanted to help children learn. But who would trust a fat woman with their children's education? They'd say I'd be a bad influence, that I'd teach them gluttony." "You'd make an excellent teacher," Jacob said firmly. "You're patient and smart and kind. Any child would be lucky to learn from you." "Maybe someday," Evelyn said wistfully, "when we're somewhere that people aren't so—" "We could start a school here," Jacob interrupted, "up on the mountain, for the children whose parents work the mines or the far ranches, kids who can't make it to town every day. We could build a schoolhouse come spring." Evelyn stared at him. "You'd do that? For me?" "For us," Jacob corrected. "For the life we're building, because you deserve to have your dreams, Evelyn. All of them." She kissed him then, slow and deep, and they made love as the snow fell outside, two people who'd been buried, one literally, one metaphorically, learning to live again. But peace, as always, was temporary. Spring arrived with false warmth, melting the snow and turning the trails to mud. Jacob went down the mountain for supplies, and Evelyn went with him for the first time since she'd been buried. She was nervous about being seen, about facing possible recognition or hostility, but Jacob held her hand the whole way down, solid and steady. They avoided Redemption Creek, trading instead at a larger settlement 2 valleys over. The people there were friendlier, curious about the mountain man and his lady, but not hostile. They bought flour and sugar, fabric and nails, seeds for a garden. It felt almost normal, almost like they were a regular couple starting a regular life. They were loading the mule when a woman approached them, older, weathered, with kind eyes. "Excuse me," she said to Evelyn, "but are you Evelyn Hart?" Evelyn froze, her heart hammering. Jacob's hand moved to his knife. "Who's asking?" he said tersely. "My name is Margaret Wells," the woman said. "I'm from Redemption Creek. I left 2 months ago after what they did." She looked at Evelyn with tears in her eyes. "I was there that day. I didn't vote to bury you, but I didn't stop it either. I've carried that shame every day since. And now, seeing you alive, it's like a miracle." "More like luck," Evelyn said cautiously. "And the kindness of strangers." Margaret nodded at Jacob. "You dug her up?" "Found her by chance," Jacob confirmed, "or providence, depending on how you look at it." "There are others," Margaret said urgently, "others in Redemption Creek who didn't agree with what happened, who've been sick with guilt. The fever passed, the rains came, and everyone realized that you had nothing to do with any of it. But by then, it was too late. You were gone." "Dead, you mean?" Evelyn said bitterly. "They thought they'd killed me." "Some did. But Blackwood, he knows you're alive. He's been preaching that you're a demon who can't be killed. He's got the town worked into a frenzy again, saying you'll return to curse them all." Margaret grabbed Evelyn's hands. "You need to leave, go far from here, because if Blackwood finds you, he'll kill you properly this time." "Let him try," Jacob said coldly. "I've been itching for a reason to go back to that town." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "No more violence. We have a life now, a good one. I'm not going to let Blackwood take that from us." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't over. Blackwood was a zealot, the worst kind, one who believed his hatred was holy. He wouldn't stop until she was dead, and he wouldn't care who he hurt in the process. That night, back at the cabin, Jacob and Evelyn talked long into the dark. "We could run," Jacob said. "Head west. Start over somewhere. No one knows us." "I'm tired of running," Evelyn replied. "Tired of hiding. Tired of letting men like Blackwood decide where I get to exist." "Then we fight," Jacob said. "I'll go to the territorial marshal, file charges, get Blackwood arrested for attempted murder." "It'll be his word against mine," Evelyn pointed out. "A preacher against a fat girl who survived being buried alive. Who do you think they'll believe?" Jacob had no answer to that. They both knew the truth. Justice was a luxury afforded to those who fit society's mold. Evelyn had never fit that mold and never would. "So what do we do?" Jacob asked finally. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We live. We build our school. We plant our garden. We make a life so full and good that what Blackwood thinks doesn't matter. And if he comes for us—" She took Jacob's hand. "Then we face him together, not as victims, as survivors." Jacob squeezed her hand. "Together," he agreed. Summer came, and with it, the school. Jacob and Evelyn built it themselves, a small log structure near the cabin with windows that let in the mountain light. Word spread among the mining families and ranchers, and by August, they had 6 students ranging from 6 to 13 years old. Evelyn taught reading and arithmetic, history, and natural science. She was patient and encouraging, seeing in each child the potential she'd been denied. And the children loved her, hugging her freely, bringing her wildflowers, never once seeing anything about her body except the arms that comforted them and the lap that welcomed them. It was everything Evelyn had dreamed of, and more. But dreams have a way of attracting nightmares. Blackwood came in September, bringing a posse of 20 men from Redemption Creek and the settlements beyond. They arrived during school hours, surrounding the building while the children were inside. Jacob was at the main cabin when he heard the shouts. He ran, rifle in hand, and stopped cold when he saw the armed men surrounding the school. Through the window, he could see Evelyn standing in front of her students, arms spread protectively. "Let the children go," Blackwood called out. "This is between us and the demon." "I'm not a demon," Evelyn called back, her voice steady despite her fear. "I'm a teacher, and these children are under my protection." "You corrupt them with your presence," Blackwood shouted. "Fill their heads with lies. Teach them that depravity is acceptable, but it ends today. Come out, face your judgment, and we'll let the children leave unharmed." Jacob's blood ran cold. He couldn't fight 20 men, couldn't protect both Evelyn and the students. His mind raced, searching for options and finding none. But then something remarkable happened. The door to the school opened, and Evelyn's students filed out, not alone, but surrounding their teacher, holding her hands pressed against her sides. The oldest boy, Daniel, spoke up in a clear voice. "Miss Evelyn hasn't done anything wrong. She's been teaching us and taking care of us. If you want to hurt her, you'll have to go through us." A murmur ran through the posse. These were their children, their brothers and sisters and cousins. And the children stood firm, protecting the woman who'd given them knowledge and kindness. Then Margaret Wells stepped forward from the crowd. "I won't let you do this," she said to Blackwood. "Not again. You tried to kill an innocent girl once, and I didn't stop you. I won't make that mistake twice." Another voice joined hers, then another. Townspeople who'd been in Blackwood's thrall were waking up, seeing the truth, that Evelyn Hart wasn't a demon or a curse. She was just a woman trying to live and love and teach, and she'd done nothing to deserve persecution except exist in a body that frightened small-minded people. "She's a sinner," Blackwood raged, "an affront to God." "Then let God judge her," Jacob called out, stepping forward with his rifle still trained on the preacher. "Not you, not ever again." For a long moment, everything hung in the balance. Then, one by one, the men in Blackwood's posse lowered their weapons. They couldn't do it, couldn't kill a woman in front of children who loved her, couldn't follow a man whose hatred had become so obvious, so ugly. Blackwood stood alone, trembling with impotent rage. "You'll all burn for this," he spat. "All of you." "Maybe," Jacob said, "but not today. Now get off my mountain, preacher, and don't come back." Blackwood fled, ranting about damnation and judgment. The townspeople dispersed, many stopping to apologize to Evelyn, to express shame for what had been done to her. The children hugged her tight, and Evelyn held them, crying not from fear, but from overwhelming relief and love. That night, after the students had gone home and the cabin was quiet, Evelyn and Jacob sat on the porch, watching the stars. "I thought we were going to die today," Evelyn admitted. "So did I," Jacob said. "But you stood firm, and people saw you for who you really are, not what they feared, but what's true, a good woman with a strong heart." "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Evelyn asked. "Really okay?" Jacob pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Better than okay. We're going to be happy, because we earned it, both of us." And in the years that followed, they were. The school grew, their garden flourished, and their love deepened. Jacob learned to carry his grief without being crushed by it. Evelyn learned that she was worthy of love exactly as she was. They had arguments and hard winters, small joys and quiet triumphs. But most importantly, they had each other. Two people who'd been buried by earth, by guilt, by shame, and who'd clawed their way back to the surface, finding light in the most unexpected place. In the autumn of 1795, 6 years after Jacob pulled Evelyn from her grave, they married in a small ceremony attended by their students and the mining families. Margaret Wells stood as witness. Jacob cried when he said his vows, and Evelyn laughed through her tears. They lived on that mountain for the rest of their days, growing old together, teaching generations of children, and proving every day that survival is only the beginning. The real victory is in building a life worth surviving for. And they did, together.